Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar Weekly Discussion topic video. This week's topic is going to be all about the Earth Kingdom, and I'm going to be doing this one in a very similar way to the way I did the Water Tribe one, and I suppose also the Fire Nation lore video I did, even though that one was more focused on like very recent information we got at the time. But this is more meant to be just a general kind of overview of the initial history of the Earth Kingdom, how it's, I suppose, run, you know, who the leaders are and stuff like that, that sort of thing. So that's basically it. Once again, I'll say, as is ever with this series, in the comments let me know what you want the next weekly discussion topic to be. I'm definitely running kind of low on topics that I suppose I'm coming up with, so I'm very much reliant on you guys to tell me what you want to actually hear me talk about. So let me know in the comments, and I will definitely pick out the best one and do it next time. So yeah, let's get into the Earth Kingdom, and as ever we'll start off with the very early history of the Earth Kingdom. Like all of the modern nations and stuff like that, the Earth Kingdom, of course, has its origins in an initial population of people living on the back of one or more Earth line turtles. And we assume that we see at least one located in what we assume is the Siwang Desert, and there's probably realistically one or two more located elsewhere around that kind of general landmass. But anyway, like with the water and fire, early water and firebenders, we assume that those humans' relationship with their line turtle worked in basically the same way, in that they had to, when they left the line turtle, they were given the power of moving earthbending, and they had to give it back once they returned. Obviously, the airbenders being the different approach to that, where they were allowed to keep their bending, basically, as far as we were aware, for good, once they did good with it, because they were peaceful with the spirits around them. So the, I suppose, important thing from there that happens with the Earth Kingdom is obviously that Wan inspires his people to obviously leave their line turtle. Eventually Wan becomes the Avatar. The spirits are also pushed back into the spirit world, and humans are allowed to basically take over their own world again. The physical world is more or less in possession of the humans. And we know that at some point a war breaks out, but before that, what obviously happens, we assume, is that just before the line turtles left, they basically gave every human the opportunity to take earthbending if they wanted it, to keep it, to protect themselves as like an art. We assume a lot of people took it, but we also assume a lot of people didn't, because it makes sense that there would be just some lines of people that just don't have any earthbending or bending in their heritage, and that only makes sense. Now, the interesting thing with the Earth Kingdom is that, as far as we're aware, they win the war between humans that takes place, in that we know that towards the end part of Wan's life, humans go to war with each other. They fight early Earth Kingdom people, fight with early Water Tribe people, fight with early Fire Nation people, and there's this big conflict, and the result of that seems to be that the Earth Kingdom wins, thus gaining control of the general overall landmass of the Avatar world, hence why the Earth Kingdom is so much bigger than all of the other nations. The Airbenders, of course, sticking to their own little islands at the north, south, east, and west. The Water Tribe being defeated and retreating to initially the north, but then eventually forming the south, and then the Foggy Swamp tribes, and then we assume the Fire Nation retreating to their Fire Islands, which forms their history. Now, the other, I suppose, historical thing that we know about in early Earth Kingdom history would be the first people who learned the true way of earthbending, Oma and Shu, and I suppose the formation of Oma Shu. Obviously, around this time, we basically have this idea that humans are still at war with each other. Even within the Earth Kingdom, just the village that Oma was from, the village from Shu was from, are at conflict with each other, and they obviously meet atop a mountain and stuff like that, fall in love, and so on. Shu is eventually killed in this war, and Oma, the female obviously in this situation, shows her earthbending powers. But for them to even have a relationship, obviously this is where the Cave of Two Lovers story comes into play. They meet, unbeknownst to everyone else, underground in obviously the Cave of Two Lovers, which is this passageway near Oma and Shu, and there they meet the Badger Moles and learn the true way of earthbending from there. And this is a thing that a lot of people kind of were initially confused about when Beginnings first came out. I think a lot of people now fully get it. Now the difference between having the ability to bend versus the knowing the martial art behind the style philosophy of that element. So the difference obviously being that firebenders initially were called fire throwers, versus Juan, who's considered a firebender because he learned from the dragons. And I suppose the same thing would be here. A lot of people knew how to throw rocks around and do some basic earthbending, but they didn't know the true way of actual earthbending until Oma and Shu learned from the Badger Moles. And we assume Oma from there on taught others how to kind of develop that technique, and that continues to this day. The martial art of earthbending is based on that. Now, obviously, this eventually forms the city of Oma and Shu, which represents the love between Oma and Shu, and it works out quite nicely. It is one of the only real legends, I suppose, we have in the Avatar universe, but it's nice that we do know the exact details of when the first firebender and when the first earthbenders learned the true way of bending their elements. So it's interesting, we don't know the exact details surrounding which waterbenders learned from the moon initially and how that came to be, or which airbenders started to model themselves after sky bison and learn, I suppose, true airbending from the sky bison. So some interesting stuff still to come out, but earthbending is one we do indeed know about. So yeah, and then the reason we know that this takes place at this point in time versus, I suppose, Juan, who learned the ability during the era where the Line Turtles were still watching over humanity, is because how could Oma and Shu meet and travel around the landmass of the world if there were spirits around so often? I definitely think there would be mention of spirits in the Oma and Shu story if spirits were still super present in the human world during this story. So I think just because of that, you can very, I think, confidently say that the story of Oma and Shu takes place after Juan becomes the Avatar and the spirits go back to the spirit world for the most part. That's the only way where realistically two villages can form outside of Line Turtles and be at conflict with each other. And realistically, you'd go as far to say as perhaps this either took place very, very early after the spirits were put back into the spirit world, or it takes place much later after the war between humans and other humans. I would say it probably takes place earlier, because it definitely seems like by the time the human war takes place, the various nations seem to have the basics of what their nations are to some extent in place. But again, that is just speculation. It could very easily be the other way, where it was only after the end of the human war during the end of Juan's life that the nations now separated into the place that they would stay for a long time. The Fire Nation, the Fire Islands, the Water Tribe initially just up in the north, the Earth Kingdom, now knowing they control the main landmass, and the Airbenders, of course, sticking to their temples. There they would have time with no change of place and where they live to fully develop their culture and properly learn everything. It's hard to place it exactly, but you get a general idea of that, definitely. And as I suppose a brief thing on earthbending, it's I think everyone knows the basic kind of the traits of it. It's a very strong, rooted style. It's probably the slowest of the bending disciplines in terms of it's so focused on power that speed isn't always something that you would associate with it. Of course, you can do quick earthbending moves, but to be really powerful, it is kind of based on that style. And there are slight differences to the style, like Toph's style is different. Bumi's style, focusing on jings and stuff like that, is different than, I suppose, even Badgermole's style. But in general, it's a very planted style that you can see with many earthbenders. Not really a massive amount to talk about, but they're probably that nation that they just survive. You definitely get the impression that during the war, the reason they won is just because they had a severe advantage. As we know, Zuko walks past an area in the Earth Kingdom that seems to be a spot, basically the spot where Wan dies. They had a huge advantage, the battle taking place on Earth. The waterbenders would be at a huge disadvantage in this war, having to bring their own water or only fight near rivers and lakes and stuff like that. The firebenders, of course, creating their own fire gives them somewhat of an advantage, but I think for any skilled earthbender, they'd have an advantage over a firebender just because they can create a wall of earth to block it, and then just having the complete terrain advantage just gives them such a huge boost, and I think that's why they win. And then other big military things that happen in the Earth Kingdom, like during the 100-Year War, I think the 600-day siege of Ba Sing Se is kind of a perfect example of Earth Kingdom philosophy and stuff like that. They just resist, they stay strong, they stand tall, they're defensive. That they stood for 16 days and were standing after that they just resisted long enough to where something happened and the siege was abandoned. Admittedly, by the end of those 600 days, I think the Fire Nation had a slight advantage, and that we know that Iroh kind of had broken through the outer wall and was making progress until the death of Liu Ten, but that more highlights some problems with the leadership of the Earth Kingdom, which I'll get into in a few minutes. But just the way they approach these battles is definitely quite interesting. I don't think they ever super highlight in the show that people from the Earth Kingdom are overly defensive, in that I think definitely airbending is made out to be the one that focuses on defense so much more than offense. Waterbending being the one where it's they take an attack and counter it. Earth Kingdom is more like a perfect balance between offense and defense. They are strong on defense, but they can attack back just as strong. So it kind of gives you an idea of the philosophy of each element. Obviously, special abilities of earthbending being metal bending and lava bending. Metal bending being the technique that apparently almost any earthbender can learn if they have a strong enough connection to Earth. Obviously some benders are better than others, but realistically anyone can learn the technique. Lava bending, on the other hand, is a bloodline trait where you actually have to be born with the ability to lava bend. We don't really know the specifics of how that happens or what the bloodline really is, just that Ghazan and Bolin are two we know. A previous fire avatar could also lava bend, and stuff like that. So it's interesting that there are these specific techniques. Another notable one would of course be the Beifong family seismic sense technique, which is basically just mimicking the way badger moles kind of move around, but it's interesting that to be a really elite earthbender, that's something you kind of need to have, that seismic sense. That gives you a very big advantage. But yeah, let's get into the kind of politics of the Earth Kingdom and how the place is run. Obviously, this links in a lot to, I suppose, the history of Ba Sing Se and stuff like that. Where does the Earth King originate and stuff like that? And again, it's one of those things we don't know a ton about. A lot of the information is kind of like the original Nickelodeon website and stuff like that. But Ba Sing Se is established to be like one of the oldest kind of cities in the entire Avatar world, and like it dates back a really, really long time. Now, how long it dates back, given that the stuff in or around Wan's time takes place like 10,000 years ago, we're not fully sure. But what we do know about Ba Sing Se is that it was originally a subterranean city, that it was carved out by earthbenders and people lived underground, which is why there's the whole like catacombs and stuff like that, why that exists underground. Eventually they moved it up, because the crystals they sold for money and it became popular, and they eventually created the massive city above the surface that is Ba Sing Se now, and the catacombs for the most part are like abandoned. The problem with the size, of course, is that having one leader of this city that is effectively the size of a country is that not everyone is treated equal. That's why there's such big class divisions with the whole wall situation and so on. But anyway, let's get into the various Earth Kings, and that's the way it works. Right up until basically present day, furthest into the future content we have in the Avatar world, the Earth Kingdom is ruled by a single Earth King. Some other cities seem to have kings of their own, like Oma and Shu. That may be just down to just sheer historical impact. In that, what King Bumi versus say King Kuei at that time, like what is the relationship there? Like, are they equals, or does Bumi ultimately have to listen to what King Kuei says? Or is it just a case where Kuei has complete control over the entire Earth Kingdom except Oma and Shu, which Bumi has control over? Like that I suppose is the slight confusion. Like it's clear that to some extent, just for sheer just history of the Earth Kingdom, that's why there is a royal family in Oma and Shu. But it's still an interesting concept. And so yeah, the Earth Kingdom is primarily ruled by kings. We don't know a lot about the Oma and Shu lineage, just that Bumi eventually becomes king somehow. Like when in the flashbacks with him and Aang, it really doesn't come across like Bumi is from some royal family or anything like that. It could be some sort of a water tribe type thing where he eventually just became powerful enough and wise enough that they made him the leader, and it happens to be the title of king. But the Earth Kingdom royal family in Ba Sing Se is a kind of actual kind of bloodline thing where it goes down through the family and stuff like that. Known Earth Kings are Yi Ming, who's the earliest one we know about. Again, just a very basic description of her, like from the Nickelodeon website, that he was a guy who just made a lot of the public works stuff happen, like the mass transit system, the monorails thing that we see. That's a big thing in the city. That was all due to him. And then, we know about the 46th Earth King, whose name we don't know, who was from Kyoshi's time. And that obviously was when there was a big revolt in the city. The lower class people weren't very happy with the way the king was handling things. He ordered Kyoshi in, and this is where the Dai Li come into things. Then Kuei, who is the 52nd Earth King, is put into place, and he's basically, up until like the promise, he basically never properly is the king because of the conspiracy in Ba Sing Se. To some extent you could say Azula is an Earth King for a while, but she's never like officially crowned, so like you wouldn't say she's the 53rd Earth King. Hu Ting is the next one we know, and I think we assume she's the 53rd Earth King, in that I think the ages match up, and that Kuei doesn't seem like that old, so like 70 years covering, Kuei having a good run as king, plus Hu Ting being fairly old herself when we meet her, that would make sense. So, and then Wu being the 54th Earth King does make sense, but obviously he is coronated, so he is the king, but he is moving to abolish there being an Earth King, and more wants to split the Earth Kingdom into independent states that have their democratically, sorry, said that word completely horribly, elected leaders, which is an interesting concept. Again, that's a sort of question where I'd be like, Oma and Shu, how does that play into things? Like, does that affect that king or what? It's almost to the point now where you kind of say, like, is King Boomy and him being a king actually an official title? Like, it's almost to the point where, like, did Boomy just in his crazy way just somehow manage to become the leader of Oma and Shu and called himself king, or is it an actually officially recognized title? I'm not fully sure, but it's really very interesting. Yeah. So as for where the leadership goes, Wu stepping down as king and letting people elect their own leaders is overall interesting in that it is such a big country that ultimately the reason so much chaos was caused by the death of Queen Hu Ting was because one person being in charge of such a large nation just caused problems everywhere when there was no one else to really step up as leader. So it makes sense, but at the same time I'm kind of like, couldn't you still be the Earth King, but just lower the amount of power that you have and more allow other people to govern themselves? Like have a king for each major province of the Earth Kingdom or something like that, but they overall react to the rules set in place by the actual Earth King. But who really knows what that happens? But yeah, that's basically how it's ruled. And then like you go deeper than that, and you have positions like the Grand Secretariat of Ba Sing Se and like leader of the Dai Li and these sort of positions. And the reason they're important is because at some point, cultural heritage of Ba Sing Se becomes a very important thing. That the Dai Li, as I said in the Dai Li video I did a while back, the Dai Li are basically a cultural heritage police. A lot of people think of them as this kind of like elite ops group, but like their official title is Cultural Heritage Police Force. And they basically just stop people from destroying things that represent the history of the nation, which is what the initial conflict with Kyoshi and the 46th Earth King was like about. The peasants were revolting, they were destroying artifacts from the history. The king didn't like that, and so Kyoshi trained people to become the Dai Li to protect the history of the nation. So yeah, the conspiracy in Ba Sing Se is a big thing, and that like it's the reason like Kui never knew about the war the entire time it was going on. The Earth King before him also didn't know, because Kui is the first Earth King to visit the like outer wall of Ba Sing Se. He's like the first one to basically go outside of Ba Sing Se, the walls, ever. And that is a huge thing that could even happen. Like, obviously, huge city. If he is a leader and respected leader, of course he would be kept there a lot. But the fact that he never traveled at all, it shows I suppose the problem with the idea of having a king, and why people like Su Yin disagreed with it in a more kind of peaceful way, and then why people like Zahir disagreed with it in a more violent way. Just the fact that he knew so little and was basically letting Longfeng run the country for him, just because he trusted him, and that would make his life easier. That's extremely telling for me. But yeah, that I don't think the video is going to be too much longer. It's going to be interesting, like if the upcoming Korra comics at all address what Wu is going to be doing in terms of electing people and how we see that happen. Like, will Korra need to oversee this happening? How much has the chaos caused by Zahir really damaged the Earth Kingdom? Will these elections go off without a hitch? That sort of thing. I assume Bolin will probably help with that sort of thing, being like a sort of some kind of a peacekeeper, I suppose, is his position at this point in time. But yeah, definitely an interesting one. You know, in Korra we didn't get to see a ton of the Earth Kingdom in terms of actually visiting a lot of places. We got to see little bits and pieces. But you know, it's such a big nation that you can see the problems that they had. But yeah, that's going to be the video. As I said in the comments, let me know what you want the next discussion topic to be for next time out. But yeah, other than that, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.